Welcome to the infamous edition of the Headstones and Microphones, where we use AI to step into the past through a researched, first-person simulation done through creative storytelling of history's most infamous people. Now, let's meet our guest. Welcome to the podcast. Let's start at the absolute beginning, where the public narrative hasn't yet distorted who you were. When and where were you born, and what was your given name?
I was born on August 1st, 1959, in Izúcar de Matamoros, Puebla, Mexico. At the absolute beginning, the name written down on my birth certificate was Ángel Leoncio Reyes Reséndiz.
What was your hometown and home life like as a child?
Growing up in Izúcar de Matamoros, things were volatile early on. When I was just 3 years old, I witnessed a man violently attack my mother with a machete. I remember crying out as my grandmother tried to pull him off her, and I just ran away in pure terror. I ended up leaving home entirely as an adolescent, starting a life on the road and drifting on my own from a very young age.
Was there a story behind your name or a nickname that stuck with you?
Even though I was born Ángel Leoncio Reyes, I ended up taking my mother's and stepfather's surnames later in life, which is how I became known as Ángel Maturino Reséndiz. But to the law enforcement agencies hunting me and to the public, I went by dozens of aliases. The name I used most frequently was Rafael Resendez Ramirez. Once the media caught on to how I traveled, they gave me a nickname that stuck forever: the Railroad Killer, or the Railway Killer.
What were you like as a child, and how many years of schooling did you actually attend?
I was a deeply troubled child and experienced serious physical trauma early in life. My mother later testified that I was dropped right on my head as a newborn, leaving me suffocating and purple. Then, when I was in my early teens, a group of students smashed me in the head with a rock. As for school, I barely had a formal education. I left my hometown as a teenager and began supporting myself entirely through petty crimes and drifting, never staying in one place long enough for proper schooling.
Was there a specific moment when you realized you were fundamentally different from everyone else?
When I returned to see my family after being gone for about 10 years, my siblings noticed I was completely changed. I had taught myself fluent English, but my mind was in a different place. I started ranting constantly about my own highly skewed interpretations of Old Testament beliefs, and I became obsessed with bizarre, complex mathematical concepts. I even spent hours trying to calculate a specific formula that I genuinely believed would determine the exact date the world would end.
What's a decision that changed everything for you, but felt small at the time?
It was the decision to cross the border into the United States for the very first time in 1973. I was just a teenager, hopping a border fence, looking to drift and find a way to survive. To me, it felt like just another line to cross, but it set off a decades-long cycle of illegal crossings, deportations, and a life spent riding the American rail lines that ultimately sealed my fate.
Let's talk about your early run-ins with the law. Before the world knew your name for your most infamous actions, what was your very first arrest or interaction with law enforcement? And what were the consequences?
My very first official interaction with U.S. authorities happened in August of 1976 when I was 17, and they excluded me from San Antonio, Texas. Just a couple of weeks later, in September of 1976, security guards caught me trespassing on Chrysler property in Sterling Heights, Michigan. They handed me over to the Immigration and Naturalization Service, and I was granted a voluntary departure back to Mexico. By the next year, in 1977, my crimes escalated, and I was convicted and incarcerated in Corinth, Mississippi, for destroying private property and leaving the scene of a crime.
At what moment did you realize your name would never be forgotten?
It was in June of 1999. The FBI formed a massive multi-agency task force in Houston specifically to hunt me down, and they officially placed my name on their 10 most wanted fugitives list. Suddenly, my face was on flyers distributed all across the United States, right alongside people like Osama bin Laden. Seeing the entire country gripped by a media frenzy, with news lines flooded and communities terrified every time a train whistle blew, made me realize the world would never forget what I had done.
Did fame make you more dangerous, or did it simply expose who you already were?
The notoriety didn't change my actions, it just brought them into the light. I had been playing cat and mouse with the authorities for decades under different names, slipping through the fingers of the law over and over again. In 1998 alone, the Border Patrol apprehended me 7 different times and just voluntarily returned me to Mexico because their systems didn't link my fingerprints to my criminal record. Even in June of 1999, I was briefly in custody and released again. The system's gaps allowed me to keep jumping on and off those freight trains, finding targets of opportunity near the tracks.
Who do you believe betrayed you first? A person, society, or your own instincts?
It was my own family who ultimately brought me in, though they did it out of love and fear. My sister Manuela saw my face on an FBI Most Wanted poster and became terrified that I would either take another life or be hunted down and killed by Mexican bounty hunters. She contacted the authorities and worked with a Texas Ranger to arrange my surrender. My wife, Juliet, also spoke to the law. They loved me, but they knew I had to be stopped.
What was your most unique habit or a random fact about you that would surprise people?
After I committed a murder, I wouldn't just flee immediately. I had a habit of lingering inside the victims' homes for a while, mostly just to sit down and eat their food. I also took sentimental items and jewelry from the homes, and I would purposely lay out the victims' driver's licenses on the table. I did that because I wanted to look at them and learn about the lives of the people I had just killed.
What did the public never understand about the pressure you were under at the time?
The public just saw a cold-blooded monster. But inside my own mind, I was operating under severe psychological delusions. During my trial, psychiatric experts explained that I was a paranoid schizophrenic. In my own twisted reality, I truly believed I was acting as an avenging angel, directed by a higher power to eliminate people I perceived as evil. I felt an absolute driving pressure from those delusions, convincing myself that I had a clear conscience for my actions.
Did you have any known rivalries that defined your career?
My primary adversary was the law itself, specifically Texas Ranger Sergeant Drew Carter. He was the one leading the investigation against me, tracking my movements across the state, and eventually tracking down my wife in Rodeo, Mexico. He was the lawman who successfully coordinated with my family to corner me legally and convince me that the line had finally run out.
What personal battles were you fighting privately while the world was watching?
Privately, I was dealing with severe mental illness that kept me entirely detached from objective reality. While the FBI was launching a nationwide dragnet, I was consumed by intense paranoia, visual and auditory hallucinations, and a deep-seated belief in my spiritual delusions. My lawyers later tried to use these severe cognitive battles to spare my life, arguing that I was profoundly insane during my entire multi-state run.
What was your darkest moment? And was there ever a time you wanted to walk away from it all?
My darkest moments were spent on the run, realizing the walls were closing in on my family. In the letters I wrote from jail, I admitted that I knew the FBI was onto me when an older man showed me my own wanted picture. I spent days watching from hiding places as police searched the very freight trains I was trying to board. I knew I couldn't keep running forever, and the threat of bounty hunters coming after me in Mexico made the pressure unbearable.
What truth was hardest to escape when you were alone at night?
The hardest truth was that I couldn't escape my own mind or the things I had done. Even when I was completely alone, I carried a cold, calculating lack of remorse because of my delusions. I told interviewers that I only damaged people when I concluded there was a reason to do so. But sitting alone in a cell, the reality of the evidence, the DNA and the fingerprints left behind at the brutal scenes, was an absolute trap I couldn't outrun.
When the law finally closed in, how exactly were you brought to justice? Walk me through the final arrest, the charges that ultimately stuck, and the legal outcome of your trials.
My end came through a negotiated surrender on July 13th, 1999. My family convinced me to give up, and I pulled up in a pickup truck to meet Texas Ranger Drew Carter right on an international bridge connecting Ciudad Juarez to El Paso. I was arrested on the spot and flown to Houston. I went on trial specifically for the brutal capital murder of Dr. Claudia Benton. The jury rejected my insanity plea, found me guilty, and sentenced me to death. I was sent to the death row at the Huntsville unit in Texas.
What's the craziest rumor ever told about you, and what part of your story has been exaggerated the most?
People built me up in their minds to be this massive, terrifying, and physically imposing phantom who could overpower anyone. But when I finally walked into that courtroom, the public was shocked to see that I was actually a very thin, small, and soft-spoken man who wore thick spectacles. Because of my small stature, I never actually attacked large individuals who could fight back. I relied entirely on element of surprise and weapons of opportunity.
What is the biggest misconception people have about your life?
The biggest misconception is that I was a completely chaotic, wild animal 24 hours a day. People couldn't reconcile the brutality of the railroad killer with my domestic life. When the media interviewed my wife, Juliet, she described me as a very passive, tranquil man when I was home. She talked about how much I loved quiet days gardening in the yard, planting grapes, and tending to fruit trees.
What would surprise people most about your ordinary human side?
Probably how deeply I cared about the safety of my own wife and daughter, despite showing absolutely no mercy to the families of my victims. My entire motivation for stepping off that bridge and surrendering to the FBI wasn't because I feared the American police, but because I was terrified of the violent threats against my family and the thought of foreign bounty hunters targeting them to get to me.
When, where, and how did you pass away?
I passed away on June 27, 2006, at the Huntsville Unit Prison in Huntsville, Texas. My life was ended by the state of Texas through execution by lethal injection at the age of 46.
Was your downfall caused more by your own flaws or by the world changing around you?
It was a mix of both, but ultimately my own mind broke me down. For years, I survived because the world's border and law enforcement systems didn't talk to each other. I was deported and released repeatedly because they didn't check fingerprints effectively. But once technology caught up, the automated fingerprint systems and DNA testing seamlessly linked my crimes across different states. The world got smaller, and my own violent delusions left me with nowhere left to hide.
What past regrets did you carry with you to the end? If you could erase one decision from your life, would you? Or was it necessary to become who you were?
In my final days, I spent hours in my cell writing long letters and creating detailed drawings of angels, which was a dark reflection of my own name. I held on to my twisted beliefs tightly, but as the execution date neared, I had to face the reality of the ultimate judgment waiting for me. I couldn't erase what I did. The path I chose on those tracks was one I carried all the way to the death chamber.
What scared you more? Getting caught, losing power, or being forgotten?
Losing control and having my family suffer because of my actions scared me the most. When I was in custody, my behavior shifted from a calculating drifter to a man completely obsessed with the spiritual consequences of my life. I wasn't afraid of the train stopping. I was terrified of the spiritual warfare I believed I was fighting, and what would happen to my soul once the state carried out my sentence.
When you look back now, do you see yourself as the villain, the hero, or something in between?
The world views me strictly as a villain, a brutal monster who brought terror to the rail lines. But through the lens of my own severe mental illness and paranoia, I viewed myself as a chosen instrument, an avenging entity operating under a completely different set of cosmic laws. I saw myself doing a duty, even if the rest of humanity saw nothing but a wake of tragedy.
Do you have any closing remarks about the interview or the stories you shared that you would like to share with the listeners before we sign off?
I just want people to know that the mind can be a dark, deceptive place, and the tracks you choose to follow can take you to places you can never return from. I lived my life in the shadows of the rails, driven by thoughts that nobody else could understand, and it led me straight to the execution chair.
And that wraps up another conversation from Beyond the Grave. Thanks for joining us on the Headstones and Microphones podcast. Remember, do better with the life you have been given and choose to do good in this life. Please help spread the word by sharing and following the pod.